I took my first ever river cruise on some of the most beautiful and romantic waterways in Europe. I spent 7 nights on board Emily Bronte, the 5-star river cruise ship from Riviera Travel, and I experienced both the Rhine and the Moselle rivers, two of the most famous rivers that Germany has got to offer. In this video today, I'm going to show you how I spent each of the days on this river cruise, including showing you what each of the ports of call looked like, to hopefully give you a feel for what it's like to take a river cruise in Europe. I'm also going to answer a question that so many people asked me before I took the cruise, and so many people have asked me since I got home from the cruise, and that is, how did I find a river cruise as a young person? So many people told me that I didn't fit the typical demographic of a river cruiser, and so many people were concerned before I went that I might find the experience to be quite boring. Well, did I find it boring, or did I love it? I guess you're going to have to stay tuned to find out. Although I was invited on board by Riviera Travel, Riviera have had absolutely no editorial input to this video, meaning that everything that you're going to hear and see today is my totally honest, unfiltered opinion and review. If you'd like to see more from my time on board this river ship, then I'll link you to another video at the end of this one, or you can head down to the description of this video to make your own way there at any point. In my previous video, I shared with you what day 1 looked like on this river cruise, which saw me fly from Manchester in the UK to Dusseldorf in Germany. I then travelled by coach to the ship, which was docked in Cologne, about an hour from Dusseldorf airport. I then spent the day exploring the ship before then sailing out of Cologne later that evening, at which point my first ever river cruise had officially begun. Waking up on day 2 was the most surreal feeling. This was my first ever river cruise, so I didn't really know what to expect, and I didn't really know what that would feel like. Opening the curtains and opening those huge doors of my room to see what was outside was a feeling that I will genuinely never forget. It was absolutely stunning. As someone that's so used to ocean cruising, looking out my cabin window and seeing land and seeing beautiful views was something that did take me a little bit of getting used to on this cruise. Overnight, we'd travelled from Cologne to Koblenz on the Rhine. We'd then joined the Moselle before I'd even woken up. Thinking back to the Rhine and Cologne, it was so busy with river ships and other boat traffic, but the Moselle felt so calm in comparison. Now, this was something that I'd repeatedly notice over the next few days until we joined the Rhine again later in the cruise. This morning, I opted to have breakfast down in the main dining room, or the Onboard restaurant. I ordered an Eggs Benedict, which has fast become my go-to breakfast order when I travel, and I'm delighted to report that the eggs on here were perfect. One of my biggest frustrations when I cruise is that I very rarely manage to get runny yolks with an Eggs Benedict, but on here, absolutely no issues. Big thumbs up. After breakfast, there was a meeting in the main lounge for all passengers on board Emily Bronte. Here, a safety briefing was conducted and an introduction was given to general life on board. As someone who's never been on a river cruise before, I did find this really valuable because I didn't really understand how so many different things worked. Here, they covered life on the ship, how our excursions and walking tours would work at each port. They gave an overview of our whole itinerary, and they also gave us an in-depth introduction to our next port of call. Every day of the cruise, they would then have a very similar briefing to brief you in full for the next port of call. I found this incredibly useful because I didn't do a huge amount of research about each of the ports before taking the cruise, and I really enjoyed going along there, having a coffee, and being told all of the best things to do when the ship would dock in a few hours' time. The ship spent all morning and a good part of the afternoon travelling until we reached Cochem at about 3 PM. This was another thing about river cruising that did catch me off guard to begin with. As someone who's so used to ocean cruising, the cruise ship tends to travel at night, and then you wake up docked somewhere new and you can head off and explore. River cruising is very, very different to that, and you'll often find that the ship is docked well into the night or all the way through the night, and it travels during the day. Now, I guess that makes perfect sense because a huge part of river cruising is soaking in the scenery and enjoying where you are, so I guess it would be a little bit strange if it only moved at night. To reach Cochem, the ship had to navigate through 3 locks due to the differing water levels along our route. I've been through the Panama Canal, for example, on ocean cruise ships, and the locks we were travelling through today were serving exactly the same purpose. They were either going to raise our ship up or lower our ship down to meet the water on the other side, which would then allow us to continue our journey along the Moselle. I found each of these locks to be absolutely fascinating. I couldn't stop walking around the decks, watching everything happening on either side and in front and behind the ship. All the structures on the top deck had been collapsed down to deck level due to the fact that we'd also been travelling under some pretty low bridges, but more on that later. I just found it absolutely amazing to see how much height the ship would lose by simply dropping everything down to the floor. I really enjoyed watching the process of passing through the locks from the area at the very back of the ship. From here, you were able to see not only what was happening with our ship, but you were also able to watch some of the smaller boats that would also come into the lock to complete the journey with us. I found this so interesting because when I transited the Panama Canal, for example, nobody else entered the locks with our ship, but here you can see multiple smaller boats were able to come in and join us for the rise or the drop, making the whole process so much more efficient. After we'd completed the journey through the lock, the smaller boats would then often speed past us, and they'd very often give us a wave and give us a cheer as they did so. One thing that I absolutely loved about the process of moving through the locks was seeing the crowds of people gathered on the shore watching the ship move through. These people were often close enough that they would wave, they'd say hello, they'd say good morning, and they'd then take some photographs as the ship passed by. I kept thinking how unusual it was to be on some form of cruise ship saying hello to someone on land. It was such an unusual and surreal feeling. As the ship was due to dock at 3 p.m, I was then able to enjoy lunch on the ship today. I chose to eat at the bistro, which was all the way at the back of the ship. I went for the Royal Britannia burger, which was essentially a cheeseburger and fries. And oh my goodness, it was so tasty. I didn't know it at this point because it was so early in the cruise, but I would be eating plenty of these burgers before disembarking next week. At exactly 3 p.m, yes, exactly 3 p.m, the time and precision on this cruise was like nothing I've ever seen before. We docked in Cochem. This meant that we were then able to head ashore and explore. Riviera Travel offer included excursions at every port of call, and during my cruise it was mostly walking tours that were offered. There wasn't any pressure to take part in these. I generally found it was good to start the day on a walking tour, but then break off when it felt right to do so. I love learning about the towns and cities that I'm visiting, but I do sometimes suffer from information overload where I just cannot take any more in. When I got to that point, that was the perfect opportunity for me to slope off and do my own thing, and that was absolutely fine, and if anything, it was also totally encouraged. The walk-in tours offered by Riviera Travel were all split by ability, so don't worry if you're watching this thinking that you might not be able to keep up with everyone else. There were so many different options. I opted for the most energetic option, and I actually thought the pace was pretty good. Cochem is such a beautiful town to just walk around. Its roots can be traced right back to the year 886, which blew my mind to think about. This place is just so old. Here, you'll find picturesque alleyways, narrow streets full of cafes, bars and shops, and what felt like a real cafe and restaurant culture. This is one thing that really surprised me about this part of Germany. I've been to Germany before, and I actually used to spend some time working out in Germany, but I've never noticed the place to have such an al fresco dining out in the street culture. I absolutely loved that. There's also some absolutely gorgeous town squares here, and they're all surrounded by the architecture that this part of Germany is just so famous for, so you can stop to enjoy a beer here or maybe even a bite to eat. A top tip that I would offer you is that if you are wanting to do that, and if you want to get off your river cruise and go and explore and stop and have a snack, it's typically more expensive in Europe to do that if you're in the main town square. I find that if you just head one street or two streets back, you'll save yourself a good amount of money and probably have a pretty similar meal. All around Cochem, you'll find buildings with markings to show where the water level is reached during previous river floods, where the Moselles then burst over into the town. I couldn't believe some of these, with one particular flood in 1993 forcing the ground floor of so many buildings underwater. After getting a feel for the town, I decided to take things up a notch and take things to a whole new height. Yes, quite literally. On the ship, they told us about an attraction called Pinner Cross, which is a cross that stands 250 metres above sea level, and it towers over the whole town and the valley that the town is in. The cross is a memorial symbol to a shepherd who wanted to save one of his animals from falling down the hillside, but unfortunately, he was killed in the process of doing so. To get there, you can take a cable car up to the top of the hill, and then you have to take a short hike to reach the cross. I don't know what I was expecting, but this cable car was steep, so not the most enjoyable of journeys for someone who personally doesn't love heights, but I guess this was going to be a lot more comfortable than hiking all the way up to the top of the hill myself. Once up at the cross, I couldn't believe the view. It was absolutely stunning. You could look down over the town and also over the river. I could even see the ship from up here. It did feel really weird to be standing up here looking down on the ship, and it felt even weirder to look at how small the ship actually looked from up here. Anyway, let's get back down the hill because it's time to get back on the ship and talk about dinner. Tonight I ate in the main dining room, and I opted to start with a mixed leaf salad, before then moving on to braised beef short ribs, and then I finished off with a tiramisu for dessert. You'll know that from my last video, if you've seen that already, that I gave the food on Emily Bronte a huge thumbs up, and I'm really glad to report that that rating from day one absolutely carries forward into this meal and the rest of the cruise. I genuinely was really impressed. I loved sitting in the dining room watching the ships just gliding by the window outside. Even by the end of the cruise, the novelty of this never wore off, and my eyes would always dart across to the window every single time I saw a ship go past. You'd sometimes see cargo ships, and then sometimes you'd see other river cruise ships, which gave you a great opportunity to have a nose and have a really good look into what other river ships looked like. To finish off my second day on board, I retreated upstairs to the main entertainment lounge, and in there I ordered a cocktail of the day and then settled down to watch some traditional German entertainment. Each night in this lounge there was different entertainment offered. You'd find quizzes, shows, or even just the resident musician playing up here. But I found this to be a really enjoyable and really relaxed venue to spend some time in, particularly after dinner, while everyone was relaxing, having a chat, and enjoying a few drinks. All in all, a really enjoyable first day on the river. By the end of the night, I was absolutely exhausted, and I think it was largely due to all the stress involved with getting that cable car to take me to the top of the hill earlier on. I was really looking forward to going to bed tonight because the ship was remaining docked in Cochem until 6:30 or 6:30 the following morning. That meant that it was almost guaranteed that there would be no movement, it would be nice and quiet, and I'd be able to get my head down to get some good rest ahead of what was going to probably be another busy day tomorrow. The following morning, I woke up to find that we'd already set sail. After such a busy day yesterday, I opted to have a really lazy morning, enjoying the luxury of just relaxing in bed watching the world pass by on the other side of the glass. Today was the day that we'd be visiting Trier, which is the oldest city in Germany. We'd dock at a town called Traben Trarbach at about 2 p.m, which was where we'd then use coaches to take us into Trier. Until then, though, it was time to sit back, relax, and soak up these views. It was another morning where the route proved to us exactly why these ships travel during the hours of daylight. Weirdly, I found this one of the most tiring parts of river cruising, with the view constantly changing. I felt as though I just couldn't sit down and look at the views. I was constantly running around with my camera. This afternoon, you guessed it, I had lunch again at the bistro before leaving the ship. This time it was a halloumi and watermelon salad to start, followed by fish and chips. And yes, it was another massive thumbs up. Fast forward to the other side of 3 p.m, and we were now in Trier. This place was so different to Cochem where we were yesterday. It was so much more built up, and it was really clear that this was a huge attraction. It's believed that Trier stood 1300 years before Rome, and here you're going to find more Roman monuments than in any other German city. One of these monuments is the Porta Nigra, a huge fortified town gate that towers above everything else around it. This gate was originally part of a system of 4 city gates, one of which stood at each side of what was a rectangular city. The Porta Nigra guarded the northern entrance to the city, and it's the only one that's still standing today. After checking this out, and a few other landmarks as part of the walking tour, I decided to break off to discover some of Trier independently. This is when I discovered the Electoral Palace, this absolutely huge, stunning pink building with the palace garden directly outside. These gardens were amazing to see. They're designed to imitate the French-style gardens of the 18th century, despite the fact they were first created much more recently, in the 1930s. I'm a really keen gardener at home, so I love to visit gardens whenever I can, and especially while travelling. I found these gardens to be absolutely incredible because everywhere just seemed immaculate. There were no deadheads on the flowers. Every bed was pristine. I was really, really impressed. On my way back to the bus, I opted to grab a coffee from a little shop in the centre to keep me going. I'm not sure what was going on with the design of the cup, but the coffee tasted great. While we were ashore visiting Trier, Emily Bronte had relocated to Bernkastel further down the river, so it felt really unusual to leave a ship in one place and board it again in another. The more I've researched river cruise itineraries, I've realised that this is actually pretty normal, so it's super important that if you do leave a ship independently, you just double check that it's definitely going to be there when you plan to return. Once back on the ship, it was time for cocktail hour. Each day on board, there was a different featured cocktail offered, and that would be served during an hour before dinner. You could, of course, order it later that night, but they did put a really nice little cocktail hour event on before dinner. Today, that cocktail was accompanied by such a great range of canapes. This is something that I grew to love about river cruising. It genuinely felt as though we were coming back to the ship and then being rewarded for having such a busy day sightseeing. And this is something that I've never seen or felt on an ocean cruise. That evening we were treated to the most glorious sunset view across the town from the ship. You know those nights where it's warm, calm, and the whole sky turns orange? Well, that's what it was like here. It was absolutely glorious. I opted to take a walk ashore after dinner, and then it was time to turn in before what was going to be, you're getting the theme, another really busy day tomorrow. The following morning, the ship was still docked in Bernkastel. Most of the passengers then set off on excursions, and the plan was that the ship would then sail back to Traben Trarbach with whoever chose to remain on board. Now that place name might sound familiar. That's because that's the place that we docked at for us all to leave the ship to head into Trier on the buses yesterday. This meant that the ship had now reached its furthest point down the Moselle that it would be travelling during this cruise. So it was now time to enjoy the journey going in the other direction. This meant more locks and, to be honest, some of the best weather we'd had so far. I opted to remain on board the ship to film some of my ship tour, which I'll be bringing to my YouTube channel, and also just to capture some of the incredible scenery with less people on board. And I can tell you now, I am so glad that I did. Cruising up the Moselle River this day with so few passengers on board is a memory that genuinely will stay with me forever. It was glorious. One thing that I found particularly fascinating about this return journey was the low bridges that I mentioned earlier in the video. When we would approach a bridge over the river, a member of the crew would come out and ask everyone to sit down, and then the entire navigational bridge of our ship would lower itself down. This would then allow the ship to glide under the bridge before it would then all raise back up again on the other side. Absolutely unbelievable. At some points through the year, river ships aren't able to travel on certain rivers because of water levels. That is one of the main reasons why river cruising can be quite seasonal, because if the water's too high and the ships can't get under the bridge, obviously it's not possible to run a river cruise. So just make sure you think about that if and when you plan your next river trip. We reached Traben Trarbach at about 11:30 am, and then we were due to set sail for Koblenz at 5 o'clock this afternoon. This place from the ship did look really pretty, but I didn't spend a huge amount of time ashore here because I wanted to go to high tea before disembarking, which was served along in the main lounge. This was held to celebrate Riviera Travel's 40th anniversary, and there were canapes, cakes, and cheese in abundance, which was exactly what I needed before then taking a walk into town to try desperately to burn some of it off. Once in the town, it was pretty and nice to have a walk around, but there really wasn't very much going on here. In the end, I ended up stumbling upon an Aldi, which is one of my home comforts, so I decided to pop in there to see if I could find any unusual products. I ended up finding an orange-flavoured Vienna wafer biscuit, which I love, some really interesting looking chocolate popcorn that had a very bad health rating at the bottom of the packet, this ambient hot dog and a roll snack. I'm really not sure if I'd be brave enough for that one. And sour cream pom bears. I used to love pom bears growing up, but I never knew that you could get all these different flavours. So you can probably imagine that I returned back to the ship today with quite a few snacks to enjoy over the rest of the week. After a quick walk around, it was time to head back to the ship before we then would set sail to Koblenz. I enjoyed an evening meal, and then I finished my night tonight out on the top deck. There was just something so relaxing about standing on the top deck of this river ship in the pitch black. The stargazing out here was absolutely incredible, and it was so cool to watch the cars driving along the side of the rivers. I genuinely could have stood out here all night, but at the end of the day, I needed to get some rest. The following morning, we woke up in Koblenz, which is the city you'll find at the meeting point of the Rhine and Moselle rivers. The name Koblenz derives from the Latin for the merging of rivers. There's loads to see and do here. There's a fortress with a cable car that connects it to the main promenade, but I decided to not go here because of my complete anxieties following the cable car a few days ago. There's loads of beautiful little streets littered with shops, cafes and restaurants, and there's also a number of parks that you can spend time relaxing in. Would you believe there's even a statue of a young boy who spits at you in Koblenz? This statue's got a really interesting background and the locals here love it. The term Shangle harks back to the 20-year affiliation of the city of Koblenz to France. The term refers to any of the children that were born during this period, but now all of the natives consider themselves Shangle, and they love the statue of the little boy, which essentially stands for quick-wittedness and the Rhenish way of life. It's such a fun statue, and I absolutely love what it stands for. Every few minutes, the statue spits a jet of water out, splashing passers-by, therefore standing up to its name as a rascal. I did walk past and try to get spat at, but unfortunately, or maybe luckily for me, it only got my shoe. After checking out this statue, I grabbed a coffee nearby to relax a little before making my way back towards the river to get back on board the ship. Down here, I wanted to visit a huge monument which is down by where the ships are before heading back on board. This monument, which is built right on the meeting point of the two rivers, is of the emperor who brought about the completed unification of Germany after 3 wars. You're able to go up inside the monument and the statue itself, and you get some amazing vantage points of the river from up here. I know, much better than what you get from that cable car, right? I particularly enjoyed the fact that when you looked out from the monument, it looked like you were standing, looking out over the front of a ship. Amazing, isn't it? After a few hours in Koblenz, it was time for our ship's 1 PM all aboard time, so that we could then cast off and sail down to Boppard. This meant that we were now leaving the Moselle behind, we were transitioning over onto the Rhine River, and that's the river that we would stay on for the rest of the cruise. Sailing away from Koblenz was awesome, and this is when I started to really realise that we'd now left behind the peaceful, quiet waters of the Moselle, and we were now joining the much busier, much more lively hub of activity that is the Rhine. As we sailed towards Boppard, I started to research what I wanted to do when we arrived. I quickly realised that one of the most famous viewpoints of the whole of the Rhine could be found just outside of Boppard itself. From that point, I knew exactly what I wanted to do when I got there, and that was to find that viewpoint and take a picture. After we docked, I was able to see the mode of transport that would take me to the viewpoint. Yes, you guessed it, a cable car. However, there was one issue, and that was that due to the fact that it was pretty windy today and the cable cars here are so exposed, they can't operate in high winds. That meant that when I was looking over to the cable cars, none of them were moving. However, I had heard that if you walked up to the cable car station, there was then a hiking trail just beside the station that if you walked up there, that would then eventually take you to the top of the hill. By the time I reached the cable car station from the ship to take the hiking trail, the cable cars were actually running up and down again. At €11 round trip, I thought, okay, do you know what? How bad can this be? I'll tell you now, the answer to that question is bad. Not just quite bad, but really bad. Now, I did make it to the top, but there was absolutely no way that I was going to take that thing back down. Every little breeze and every gust of wind had the whole car swaying from side to side, and at parts I was so high off the ground. In the end, I ended up hiking back down because my nerves just couldn't cope with the return journey. But what I found at the top made all of the stress and panic so worth it. Here it is. One of the most famous viewpoints of the whole of the Rhine, the U-Bend. I could have stayed up here for hours, looking down at all of the trains running along the side of the valley, watching life down in the town, and watching all the ships just gliding up and down the river completely effortlessly. As much as I'd have liked to stay up here a lot longer, I did have the slight task of a hike back down the hill to contend with, and so, with that, I set off back towards the river. Back down in the town, I took a walk to appreciate the beautifully picturesque little pocket of Germany that the ship had brought us to today. Think traditional architecture, beer gardens, alfresco dining everywhere, church bells ringing, pristine flower beds, baskets and pots everywhere. I was so impressed. I even found a vending machine that I've never come across before. This vending machine served soft serve ice cream. Let me know in the comments if you've ever seen this before. I actually wish that they offered this on ocean and river cruise ships that don't include soft serve ice cream, because genuinely, I think I'd spend a fortune. When I got back along to the ship, I realised that we'd now been joined by another river cruise ship. I mentioned this in my last video, but I was fascinated by the way in which these ships dock. Rather than going to another dock elsewhere in the town, the second ship just attaches onto the first one, and the passengers from that ship would then walk across the first one to make it onto land. I opted to head upstairs and have a glass of red wine up on the top deck before then going down to get ready for dinner. And it did feel really strange to be looking across onto the top deck of another river cruise ship, with a little bridge then connecting us to allow me to walk over if I really wanted to. The following morning, it was time for what I had hoped all along was going to be the absolute highlight of this river cruise, and that was cruising through the Rhine Gorge. The Rhine Gorge is the popular name given to the upper middle Rhine Valley, which is a 65-kilometre or 40-mile section of the Rhine between Koblenz and Rudesheim. This part of the Rhine was added to the UNESCO list of World Heritage Sites in 2002 for a number of reasons. First, because of its beauty as a cultural landscape. Also, because of the key role it plays as a trading and transport route across Europe, and has done since prehistoric times. And also, because of the unique adaptations that all of the buildings in the area have had done due to the steep slopes on either side of the gorge. Riviera Travel did a truly exceptional job of covering the Rhine Gorge for us. The cruise director was coming through the speakers all across the top deck and also into the main entertainment venues on board the ship, meaning that whether you were inside or outside, you weren't missing anything that was going on outside the ship. One of the key landmarks of this part of the Rhine is the Loreley, which is a huge rock which is at a particularly narrow section of the river. This rock produces an echo, and it's associated with the legend of a beautiful maiden that threw herself into the Rhine. The myth is that she now presents herself as a siren who would lure fishermen to destruction when they would then go and hit the rocks. As we sailed past the Loreley, the onboard crew served us a famous Rudesheimer coffee, which is a coffee containing rich, dark coffee, brandy, sugar, and cream, which was a very distinct flavour, and it was nothing like what I thought. I expected it to taste maybe quite similar to an Irish coffee, but it was totally different. As you cruise through the gorge, you pass by roughly 40 historic castles. These castles would historically collect tolls from the ships that are passing up and down the river. Nowadays, some of them operate as luxury hotels, some are museums, some have unfortunately fallen into what looks like disrepair, but seeing these castles from the top deck of a river cruise ship is another memory that I will never ever forget. I would love to do this again at some point during my life because honestly, it was unbelievable. I'm going to leave you now to enjoy some of the scenery that we experienced while cruising through the Rhine Gorge, and I'll pick up with you again in a few minutes' time.
At 29 and I find myself wondering what did happen to the last 10. I ran away with my life, fast forward, never turn back again. It's kind of funny that the more we pass time, the more we need to set them rewind. And 19 was the year I had to leave you, but now I'm seeing all the signs. Is this really happening? I can't believe it's true. I'm just as surprised as you. Is this really happening? I can't be too sure, but one day I'll be yours again. Life lessons come one in a dozen. The other 11 give something from nothing. I sit here looking for an answer. Maybe the biggest question was in the last chapter. You gave me the soul I have today. Without you I never could have moved away. But now I see what you teach. I do believe I always should have stayed. Yeah. Is this really happening? I can't believe it's true. I'm just as surprised as you. Is this really happening? I can't be too sure, but one day I'll be yours again. One day I'll be yours. One day I'll be yours. One day I'll be yours. Life lessons come one in a dozen. The other 11 give something from nothing. Life lessons come one in a dozen. The other 11 give something from nothing. Life lessons come one in a dozen. The other 11 give something from nothing. Life changes just open the door. One thing's certain, I'll always be yours.
After a few incredible hours of sailing through the Rhine Gorge, Emily Bronte then docked at what was going to be our final port of call on this cruise, and that was Rudesheim. The weather here was amazing. It was really hot. It was 32 degrees outside with no wind and a clear blue sky. It was perfect. As chance would have it, while we were sailing out of Koblenz, I spotted another Riviera Travel river ship. I then spotted on Instagram that Helen Rich from Visit With Us were on board that ship. We then realised that our ships were going to be docked on the same day together in Rudesheim, and so we were able to then arrange to meet up, which was absolutely brilliant. We opted to use the complimentary bike service that Riviera Travel offers on the river ships to head out cycling together, which was good, but it was so warm. After a short ride, we ended up opting for the much easier option, which was to go to the beer garden down by where the ships were docked and have a beer. Rudesheim itself is a really charming and idyllic place. This is actually one of the most famous wine towns on the whole of the Rhine, and if I'd realised that before docking here, yeah, maybe I would have switched my German beer for a German wine. However, perfect excuse to go back. This place is right in the heart of the Riesling country, making it the perfect place to wander around, soak up the place, enjoy everything going on around you, with the occasional stop to sample some of the local flavours. One of the most popular things to do here is visit the Music Cabinet Museum, which houses over 400 self-playing musical instruments. I didn't make it in here, but this is maybe one that you could add to your list if you do find yourself cruising to Rudesheim at some point in the future. After a cycle, a walk, and a beer in Rudesheim, it was time to retreat back to the ship. Not only was it a bit too warm for me out there, but tonight was also going to be the more formal gala evening on board, and so I was keen to get back to the ship to relax and chill out a little bit before that then started later on. You'll remember that I mentioned in my last video that all of the suites up on the diamond deck of the ship where my cabin was came with a complimentary bottle of champagne. And so I decided today would be the perfect afternoon to enjoy this before getting ready to go out for a fancier dinner on board. As luck would have it, we ended up having another ship dock beside us today, meaning that my hopes of sitting in the room, sipping champagne, looking out at the water were dashed because I was looking directly into someone else's cabin. This was such a strange feeling to be looking out from my cabin into someone else's. So it's maybe worth bearing in mind if you've never been on a river cruise before, that view outside your window could change at any moment. For tonight's gala night, I opted to wear chinos, a shirt, and a pair of brown shoes. Gala night on this river cruise was nowhere near as formal as what I've experienced on some ocean cruises, but it was still great to see everybody making that little bit of an extra effort to enjoy everything being a little bit smarter around the ship tonight. Dinner tonight was served in the main dining room, and here's the menu. The menu and the food tonight really was a step up from what I've seen throughout the rest of this cruise, and to be really clear, I was really impressed with everything I'd seen from a food point of view right up until this point. I opted to start with the wild salmon and seaweed mosaic before moving on to the pure elegance Angus beef fillet, before finishing with the strawberry and basil delight. I really enjoyed my evening meal tonight. I met a few people who opted to dine ashore tonight due to the fact that we were docked well into the night here in Rudesheim. I genuinely think that those people missed out tonight because the food that I had was great, and I would say this was my favourite meal of the cruise, but it is worth adding that if you do want to eat ashore rather than on the ship, that option is absolutely available to you, so it's really nice to have so many options on a river cruise that you just don't have when you travel on ocean cruise ships. After dinner, it was time to head upstairs to the main lounge for tonight's entertainment. It was actually our cruise director who performed tonight, and he was the main act. He's previously performed on the West End, so this environment is probably pretty natural and pretty comfortable to him, but I've never seen it on a cruise where it's been the cruise director who's provided the entertainment after dinner. He seemed to go down so well with all of the passengers on board. It was really good fun and I really enjoyed it. The following day was our final day of cruising on the Rhine, as the ship left Rudesheim in the early hours of the morning to arrive in Cologne around lunchtime. By the time I woke up, we were already well through the Rhine Gorge and well on our way up to Cologne. I realised pretty quickly that I only had a few hours left of being able to sit down and watch all of this beautiful scenery just gliding past on both sides. I absolutely loved that part of river cruising. While we were heading back to Cologne, I was invited to visit some of the other room types on board. I've since been able to then put together some room tours to show you here on YouTube, so if you'd like to see more from on board this river cruise ship, make sure that you're subscribed to the channel and stay tuned. It was great to be able to stand outside and watch us sail into Cologne in daylight. When we left here a week ago, it was night time, so I got a really different feel for the place. Pulling in today, it was clear. This place was a complete hive of activity, and I was really excited actually to spend my final day off the ship seeing more of Cologne as a city before tomorrow flying back to the UK. For the final night of the cruise, Emily Bronte essentially became a floating hotel. Tomorrow was changeover day, which meant that all of this week's passengers, including me unfortunately, would fly back to the UK or fly back to home, and next week's passengers would then travel out to meet the ship to start a Rhine and Moselle cruise adventure of their own. So, that's what a week on a luxury 5-star river cruise ship looked like for me. The question I want to move on to answer now is, how did I find the whole experience as a young person? Did I get bored? Or did I really enjoy it, and would I recommend it to you? I should start answering this question by saying that on board the ship and when ashore, I was constantly busy. Every day the ship was in port, I was up and off the ship and exploring wherever we were. When I was on board the ship, I then did have time to switch off, relax and chill out, but there was always so much going on around me that I was just always milling about, constantly busy. Looking specifically at age and how I found it as a younger person, factually I was the youngest person on the ship that week, but at no point did I feel like I didn't fit in, and at no point did I not feel welcome. If anything, the complete polar opposite applied, and I felt so at home on that ship. Personally, I've always seen age as just a number, and some of my best friends are 25, 30, even 40 years older than me, so it really doesn't matter to me that I was the youngest on board the ship. Sure, if you love bustling nightlife and you want to be partying on your ship until 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, then you might get itchy feet on a river cruise. However, if you want to relax, switch off and see a particularly picturesque and beautiful part of the world in what feels like a pretty luxurious environment, then river cruising could be for you. I hope you can tell that I've had an amazing first ever river cruise experience. As I mentioned at the start of this video, I was invited on to Emily Bronte by the team at Riviera Travel, and I'd like to pause now to specifically thank them for this experience, because you have genuinely opened my eyes to a whole new way to see this world. I've had a great time on board, and for that, thank you. I really hope you've enjoyed this video today. If you have, then why not come and join me in another one? Over on my channel, I have got so much ocean cruise and river cruise content, so why not head over there and see if there's anything that piques your interest. If, however, you'd like to stay on the topic of Emily Bronte and discover more from my time on board this river ship, then why not come and join me in this video. Over here, I share with you what my day one looked like, including travel out to the ship from the UK, my first impressions, and I also cover here some of the things that really surprised me during my first ever river cruise. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll hopefully see you either over there or in another video.